Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Kieliszewski, forensic psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Recently, on one of my YouTube videos, there was a discussion in the comment section among viewers pertaining to grooming and the concept of grooming and how that's involved in sexual abuse cases. One person requested I do a video to help us understand what grooming is and how it plays out in cases of sexual abuse. Now, a warning. In this video, I'll be talking in depth about aspects of sexual abuse, and I'll offer some real-life examples from cases that I've been involved in. So please view this video with caution, especially if you have your own trauma history. Now, to start, we need a couple of definitions. The first one is a definition of sexual abuse. Now, at first glance, this may seem simple or unnecessary, but when we get into a discussion about the science behind, in my experience with examining grooming, having an accurate definition of sexual abuse will be important. Believe it or not, there are different definitions of sexual abuse. The way sexual abuse is defined in criminal law may be different than the sociological definition of sexual abuse, or there may be a medical definition of sexual abuse. And what about sexual exploitation? Is that a form of sexual abuse? And in some definitions of sexual abuse, it really doesn't pertain to or cover how grooming could be involved. For example, we often think of grooming where an adult sexually abuses a child. But we can easily make the argument that rape or forced sexual encounter is a form of sexual abuse as well. And what about cases where a therapist manipulates a patient into a sexual relationship? Is that sexual abuse? Or a priest or a pastor manipulates someone in their congregation into sexual activity? Is that sexual abuse? Or what about a boss who harasses an employee and uses their position of power over a subordinate to gain sexual activity by threatening that person with their job? Is that sexual abuse? So, for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to define sexual abuse as sexual behavior by one person upon another that is perpetrated using force, for example, violence, threats, fear, or could occur by taking advantage of another person's vulnerability, use of deception, leveraging a power differential in the relationship, abusing power, violating trust, things like that. And in this situation, there are conditions created where the victim does not offer full consent or experience the free will to consent to the sexual activity. Okay, now let's define grooming. In cases of sexual abuse, the proper term, the term that's used in the research, is actually called sexual grooming. Now, I did my dissertation on sex offenders of children, and in my clinical practice as a forensic psychologist, I've seen thousands and thousands of cases that involved sexual grooming. So we're going to define sexual grooming as a process of actions or behaviors used to establish an emotional connection or trust with a minor or vulnerable person as a means of persuasion of allowing a sexual boundary to be violated. Now, this can be done in person or online. Now, sexual grooming not only occurs with a potential targeted victim, but can also include the victim's parent or family. Now, in the research on sexual grooming, they talk about 4 stages of sexual grooming. Number 1 is targeting. Perpetrators often select the person or the child that they're going to groom. For example, a single mom with a child and an absent dad, the perpetrator moves in as a helper and gains the trust of the mother and the child. I've seen that scenario many, many times. Online, perpetrators will often target minors who may express sadness or loneliness, or just a youth that's looking for a lot of attention. Number 2, gaining access. This can include gestures or things to make the potential victim feel special. Examples could be gifts, excessive compliments, or excessive attention. This also includes setting up scenarios where the perpetrator has one-on-one time with the potential victim, offering free babysitting, sleepovers. By the way, if a 35-year-old man who's not related to a child wants to have a sleepover with them, that could be a sign of grooming. Number 3 in the process is trust development. the perpetrator becomes a stable and consistent presence in the potential victim's life, often offers emotional support, guidance, or even protection. The fourth stage in the grooming process, desensitization to sexual activity or touch. This will often start out with small boundary violations. It could start out as frequent or forced hugs. Wrestling is a big one I've seen in many cases. And then this sometimes can also involve sexual talk, allowing the child access or exposing them to pornography. Number 5 in the stages, maintaining control. This often involves use of secrecy. This is our special time. This is a secret between you and I. I could get in trouble if people found out what was happening. And sometimes the perpetrator will utilize shame. What would your parents think if they found out that you did this kind of thing? Now, in this approach above, we use children as the primary example of sexual grooming. But this model can also be applied to sexual exploitation of adults. The big difference is sexual activity between an adult and minor is well defined as illegal in the law. Or in other situations where there's a potential leveraging of authority of power. So for example, if a therapist grooms a patient into sexual behavior, in most states that's illegal. In some states, a lot of states, if a clergy member grooms or manipulates a person into sexual behavior, and the most recent one is teachers. So in some stages, the age of consent for sexual contact is 16 years old, but a lot of states are now imposing laws that if a high school teacher, for example, has a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old student, that's considered a form of sexual abuse. Now, I remember when I finished my dissertation, and I saw so many cases of grooming, sexual grooming, that resulted in abuse, that I actually started to write a little handbook about what parents could spot to suggest potential sexual grooming taking place. And during that time, I also researched, and I found there was actually national organizations that are already doing some of this work to try to prevent child sexual abuse. One, particularly at the time, and this is 20 plus years ago, was called Stop It Now, and they're still active. Another one is the National Coalition of the Prevention of Sexual Abuse and Exploitation. So again, grooming has been established in the research and well studied. When I do sex offender risk assessments, I look for signs of grooming. Oftentimes, if I'm called in as an expert witness in court, the prosecution a lot of times really holds up grooming as evidence of an intent to sexually abuse. All right, if you have interest in forensic psychology, subscribe to this channel. Pass it along to others who have similar interests. I'm also on various social media outlets. Everything is under Dr. Jeff Kieliszewski, forensic psychologist. Thanks.